The Walt Disney Company got the rights to use the land as they saw fit here in Central Florida. They had the ability to create their own special improvement districts, to govern themselves, and to basically go around state law as much as they wanted to. And the main reason they got that, partly it was because Walt Disney, they were able to pull on some heartstrings because Walt Disney had died, but partly because of this whole Epcot Center, this idea that industry was going to come to Florida and they were going to build something new and unique, and it was really going to put Florida on the map and really grow the community, grow the tax base, the whole thing. So here it was now 1975. They had signed this agreement about 10 years ago. It was about 9 years ago that they had signed the agreement. So it was just after Walt's death. And, you could argue that Walt's death was part of the reason that they got what they wanted, but also this whole idea of Epcot, of creating this prototype city, that was really the selling point. So by the time the 10th anniversary was coming around, the state, while it wasn't outwardly asking for results, was asking Disney what their plan was. So there was a need, a desire from the Disney company to actually do something about Epcot. What they didn't want was the state to step in and go, wow, you haven't done anything, we're going to take away all these rights and remove these rules to allow you a special improvement district. So Disney had a bright idea, and because the Contemporary Resort is literally the center of it all, or was at the time that they were setting all this up, the Disney company decided that it was time to host another event where they talked about their plans for Epcot. And in this case, what they did was they got together, they got the Southern Governors Association in 1976, came here and met, and they were shown an overview of what Epcot was going to be. There was also the fortuitous event that Henry Kissinger was passing through town. He was the Secretary of State at the time, and they were selling him on the idea of the whole idea of Epcot. So along the way, Card Walker had gotten involved with the Secretary of State and managed to prevail upon him to come and see a demo of what they had in mind for Epcot. And in doing so, because Kissinger was coming, there were also some delegates from other countries coming, so they could also do the pitch to them at the same time. So it was this really interesting confluence of events over the course of a couple of days where the Walt Disney Company really sold the idea of Epcot and really brought together all these thoughts and all these people to make sure that A, they stayed relevant and that they could keep themselves out of the news essentially and keep their laws the way they had them, and then B, to actually sell the idea of Epcot, because they still wanted to do it. It was just a question of how to do it and what it was going to be. So let's take a look at that a little bit further and understand what it's all about. As you may recall, in 1967, Disney received special privileges from the state. They were granted a special improvement district and formed 2 cities where they could essentially govern themselves. The legislature's actions were hotly debated as future governors and legislative bodies were formed, but the tourist dollars were always important to the state, so no changes were seriously considered. But one of the key reasons Disney was granted these powers was because they sold the idea of Epcot, a model city of the future that would also bring industry and jobs to Florida. The Magic Kingdom opened in 1971, and there was an expectation that there would be at least some progression on Epcot. But for the first few years, for various reasons, there wasn't much movement. Disney couldn't figure out how to build something like this without Walt's guidance. And there was another compounding factor: how could they possibly afford an endeavor like this? The Magic Kingdom was expensive to build. Looking at the annual report, we can see the operating income was good for the first 2 years, and they paid off a fair amount of debt. Things were positive. Revenue was on the upswing, and that led to profitability and a lot of hope. And then came the oil embargo of 1973, which limited supply and drove up oil prices, which meant that fewer people were traveling by car to places like Disney World. Attendance was down for a while, which absolutely hurt their bottom line. The embargo ended in 1974, but the damage lasted for a while longer, and there was a recession that followed that. And by the way, who was mostly responsible for ending that embargo? That would be Henry Kissinger, who we'll get back to in just a minute. Even so, Disney's operating income was good, and it beat the market. But no one was sure that was going to be the case as 1974 turned into 1975. But Disney had big plans and grand ambitions, and still planned to do a number of things in 1975. In January, they opened Space Mountain in the Magic Kingdom. Then they opened Disney's Village Marketplace a few months later, because it made sense to try and grow the business and get people to want to experience new and different things at the resort. So here we are in early 1975. State oversight and related questions combined with a, to this point, lack of vision for Epcot were colliding. The state was expressing some desire to get an update prior to the 10th anniversary of the agreement, coming in 1977, and Disney really did have to get the ball rolling on Epcot. There was an entity known as the Southern Governors Association that brought together governors that were looking out for the interests of their states, working cooperatively to solve problems among the states. They held an annual meeting to be in person and bring up issues that they could discuss among themselves. The location for these meetings was moved among the states every year, so Florida hosted about every 10 years. In 1975, it was Florida's turn to host. Governor Reuben Askew started planning in 1974, and his first thought was go to the new Crown Jewel, now just a few years old, and hold it at Walt Disney World. Disney was delighted to have a distinguished convention heading to the Contemporary Resort. The perfect stage was set for a meeting. The Contemporary Hotel would be the site, and Disney had an opportunity to convince the state that not only did it have a plan for Epcot, but that it was an amazing plan, and the publicity for the plans that they could share would be good overall for tourism. Now, in the planning phases, here's where things get even more interesting. Don Tatum was the CEO, and Card Walker was the president of the company. They both made overtures to get Henry Kissinger to attend the meeting. Reuben Askew also did his part to lobby for Kissinger to attend. Kissinger was a fan of Disney and visited Disneyland several times over the years. So there's that piece, and although there is no known connection, it's also likely that Richard Nixon, who left office in mid-1974 and was a huge fan of Disney's, likely also suggested that Kissinger attend. Kissinger was a major player in world diplomacy and international relations as Secretary of State, serving both Nixon and Ford. And as such, he was keenly interested in the idea of Epcot and the nature of bringing countries together. And when he agreed to come, Kissinger then became the de facto keynote speaker at the conference. Disney continued working on their scale model for Epcot, updating and expanding upon it. This became the one that was seen so many times leading up to Epcot's opening. In its original incarnation, they had this section that was the World Showcase. It was 2 semicircles that housed individual nations, and this was among the parts that was displayed prominently to Kissinger. So the meeting was held on September 16, 1975 at the Contemporary. Kissinger arrived in town and was offered an opportunity to preview Epcot, and so he jumped at the chance. He saw the 1967 Disney film and the model.
This is where the early planning is taking place for our so-called Disney World project. Now, the purpose of this film is to bring you up to date about some of the plans for Disney World. Everything in this room may change time and time again as we move ahead. But the basic philosophy of what we're planning for Disney World is going to remain very much as it is right now. We know what our goals are. We know what we hope to accomplish. And believe me, it's the most exciting and challenging assignment we've ever tackled at Walt Disney Productions. Epcot will take its cue from the new ideas and new technologies that are now emerging from the creative centers of American industry. It will be a community of tomorrow that will never be completed, but will always be introducing and testing and demonstrating new materials and new systems. And Epcot will always be a showcase to the world for the ingenuity and imagination of American free enterprise. I don't believe there's a challenge anywhere in the world that's more important to people everywhere than finding solutions to the problems of our cities. But if we can bring together the technical know-how of American industry and the creative imagination of the Disney organization, I'm confident we can create right here in Disney World a showcase to the world of the American free enterprise system. I believe we can build a community that more people will talk about and come to look at than any other area in the world. And with your cooperation, I'm sure this experimental prototype community of tomorrow can influence the future of city living for generations to come.
After the film was over, Kissinger chatted with Card Walker and Don Tatum about the project. The next day, Kissinger told the Orlando Sentinel he was excited about Epcot and that it would do more for world peace than his own so-called shuttle diplomacy, where he was shuttling back and forth between different cities and countries. So the governors met, brought in some other dignitaries and a bevy of reporters who gushed over the plan. Card Walker spoke and said, Walt's concept was truly international in scope, and in the years immediately before his death, it became his major interest and concern. In planning the entire Florida project, everything was considered as an eventual part of the master plan of Epcot. The first phase has been the recreational community, the Magic Kingdom, the hotels and lakes and campground, which has played host to more than 40 million in less than 4 years. Now we're launching the second phase of Walt's ideas, the scientific, industrial, communication, world cooperation aspects of Epcot. Kissinger spoke, mostly about the oil embargo and the energy independence, though he answered many questions about trade and international relations afterward. It's funny, even though he was the keynote, essentially, the official State Department record refers to them as informal remarks. And that was that. The plan for Epcot was solidified and the state was happy. Now there was one other bit of business and another win for Disney. Showing Kissinger the model and getting him to endorse it meant that there would be fewer regulatory hurdles to get through as they built the property. Of course, there were still many questions about paying for all of this, but that was a question for another day. This started something, and Disney could build off of it. Later, they would present to dignitaries from other countries, and of course, there was the International Chamber of Commerce in 1978. But this meeting of the Governors' Conference was the start of what could quite literally be a whole new world showcase.